but it's not harming the surface in which it's growing. Third way plants cling is the way clematis cling. They have a leaf stem called a petiole, and that petiole winds around much like a tendril. Once it has wound around something, it kind of hardens, and it doesn't change its shape. And it can extend to a certain extent, but it cannot extend beyond about 1.5 to 2 inches. If you try to grow a clematis on standard wooden lattice, I went to the local hardware store with my tape measure. These are the sorts of things we do for research. And I measured the lattice. The lattice pieces are 1 1/8 inch wide and 1/8 inch thick, which totals up to 2.5 inches. And most clematis petioles can't stretch that far. So if you want to grow a clematis up on a lattice, you may want to give it a little help with some pea netting or some string. Okay? Fourth way plants cling. Anyone have bindweed? Winds around. I read somewhere in a book about wildflowers, he had a very loose definition of wildflowers, that if you wind it the other way, it always goes the same way. You look at your bindweed, and its relatives, morning glory, okay, they always go the same way. It's like all the conchs, all the seashells, they all have the same direction. We have fossil evidence that conchs used to go both ways. And I'm wondering why natural selection got rid of the other way. I'm curious about that. Anyway, in this book it says if you wind it the other way, it'll die. So take that home and try that out and let me know. So you have to take into account what is the plant going to need to cling onto the surface or structure you're using, and take that into account in what you're doing. This is my blue light clematis. This is a copper tubing trellis that I made when copper was cheaper. And it's in the half-inch copper tubing is a really nice size for growing clematis. It seems to work really well. Some people have asked me, what about growing it? Isn't it bad to grow it on a dark metal structure? Isn't it going to get hot? Isn't it going to burn it? It's not going to do that. You can grow a clematis or a vine on a black metal trellis without a problem. Another thing to think about. Beginners you intend to go on. Clematis can live 80 years. God only knows how long the wisteria can last. Longer than I'm going to be alive. If you put this on a wooden trellis, what's going to happen to that trellis eventually? It's going to rot. Even a bamboo trellis will eventually rot. And you're going to have to A, replace it, and B, in the course of replacing it, there is a potential that you will do as I did and kill Will Goodwin, another early flowering, large flowering hybrid clematis that I loved. I killed Will, planticide, me, because I was replacing that stupid wooden trellis I started with. So put something in good quality. You can get a decent quality trellis for relatively inexpensive for a plant that might give you a lot of beautiful flowers and rewarding garden experiences for decades. You can grow them in a pot. Now here's where the dark black thing is a factor. Clematis like to be cool, moist soil conditions. You can do that by mulching them really well. You can do that by shading them with other plant matter. I'm a little cautious about planting too much close to a clematis that I've just planted because they are heavy feeders and I don't want to create a competition situation. But if you put a clematis in a dark pot, what's going to happen? You're going to have parboiled clematis for vegetable tonight, and it's really fibrous. It's not really easy to chew. It's kind of tasteless. So use a pot that's going to be suitable for that. Enough room. Keep in mind also that anything in a container dries out faster than the same thing in the ground. So you've got to make sure that you keep the water on that pot appropriately. Stick your finger in the soil and see how it is. Can't tell you how many people don't even think to do that. Keep in mind, we do not have moisture sensors on our bodies. Our fingers do not sense moisture. How do we sense moisture? Coolness. We have temperature sensors, but not moisture sensors. So get in there, and the other thing you can do, take a nice bamboo stake or something, stick it in and measure. You can measure how deep you stick it in the soil, pull it out, and you'll be able to see the part that's moist. And if it's more than 3 or 4 inches, or maybe even more than 2 inches below the soil level, you need to top that up, okay? These are some clematis I grow in pots, and they grow every year in these pots. I move them to the back of my house, or back of my garage in the fall. This one is a very slow, painful process still. I'm thinking of getting a nurseryman's ball cart, and not because I need to move a lot of trees, but because this thing here. I could hire a man too, that would help. But I move them to the back of my garage, behind my compost bins, under my yew tree. It's the most protected part of my yard. It's also close. The compost bins are relatively warm through the winter, the warmest place in the yard that's not exposed to winds, etc. And I mulch them very heavily with pine bark mulch. Because what kills plants in the winter is not the cold. It is the dry. It's desiccation that kills plants during the winter. And potted plants are especially vulnerable to drying out. So by mulching them really, really well, it holds the moisture in. And I haven't moved them out yet, but they're already sprouting. Hopefully I'll have them out in time for the pruning workshop, but I don't know yet about the big one. Although Stephen's coming to help me in the yard on Sunday. You can grow these plants into a tree or a shrub. Now this is not an elm, except maybe with wisteria. You're not going to grow a clematis into an elm tree, or a maple, or an oak, because the plant's not going to be able to have anything to hold on to before it gets to those lowest limbs. Okay? We're talking something like a dogwood, or a redbud, an amelanthus, an ornamental tree. And you have a lot of ideas to work with on this. You can have it either blooming at the same time to complement. You can have it blooming at a different time and say, oh yes, that's my dogwood. It's very special, isn't it? It has red flowers in June. How amazing. Isn't that something else? No. Yes, I thought that was a red bud too, but no, actually it's a white bud. Well, big white buds. You know, have some fun with it. Anything that looks good in your garden is going to look good in a vase in your house. Think about combining plants and how they look good in your house. Maybe that will look good in your garden too. Clematis and other vining plants have an interesting habit that is a nice contrast to your more upright forms like your peonies, your hydrangeas, your irises. So think about how you can combine plants together. And I had this person who asked me, I did a talk on clematis and roses up in Saginaw Valley. And a woman asked me, I have a rose, I'd like to put a clematis with it, what should I do? And I said, well, it depends on when you want it to bloom. If you want it to bloom at the same time or a different time, it depends on if you want a complementary color or a contrasting color. And do you want it to, how do you want it to combine with that plant? And that's what you have to ask yourself those questions, bless you, about how you want it to look, how you want it to perform. You've got a lot of options. This is Pearl d'Azur clematis, which is one of the most popular clematis. It has a reflex petal, so if you look at the flower head on, it almost looks like it's a square. It's a real true blue with a yellow center, and it's here with the weeping birch, which is fine.
On that other slide with the tree, that number 5.
Clematis, below grade. When you plant clematis, because they like to have cool, moist root conditions, you plant them 2 to 4 inches below grade.
Below grade.
Here's the soil level, here's the crown. That's below grade. So when you plant it, don't plant the crown of the plant. The crown of the plant is where the branches come out and the roots go down. If you plant that at grade and it gets dried out, you'll be very, very unhappy.
Well, that's why I like that.
Yes. That is, when I have a client with the clematis problem, the first thing I look at is look for the crown. 9 times out of 10, it's too high. And I've done that too. When I first started doing this, I lost my Lady Betty Balfour, one of my favorite late flowering, large flowering hybrids. I looked at her. I had planted her too high 10 years ago, when I was even more ignorant than I am now.
I'm sorry, you said 4 inches?
2 to 4.